Hi guys, it's Janae and welcome back to my channel. And yeah, today we are finally on time. For once in my life, I'm on time with my life, sort of like. Ideally, I would have liked to start this at 5, but I had other things that kept me occupied until then, which is why the notification for this live coming up was like such short notice, because I wasn't actually quite sure when today's live would be taking place. But now we're here, finally. And I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to see like how the situation with Tiny Chuaning is gonna be resolving itself. So I am gonna give like 5 minutes for people to arrive, I think, more or less, and then we shall get into it. But while we wait, we can so long kind of like see where we're at. So we left off on page 91 with Moran ordering Tiny Chuaning more milk, or like, what was it? Soy milk. So yeah, I'm gonna be taking my break as normal, but we are gonna be doing 2 hours, so I'm really excited. I have been really enjoying this. So yeah, just let me know if the audio is okay. It should be fine, but it's always good to get reassurances. And other than that, I think I always say 5 minutes, and then I never have the patience for said 5 minutes that I give for people to arrive, and I don't know why I do this to myself. So yeah, let me just see here. Okay, so there are 400 and hi. Okay, there are 479 pages, so there should be more, like maybe like 10 more live streams until the end of this volume specifically. So I think like maybe another month and a half we'll be able to finish this, depending on how quickly I manage to read. But I think like a month and a half is a good estimate. Okay. Can we get started? I think we can get started. Okay. And so Chuaning contentedly began drinking a second jar. He had always loved sweets, but he'd once acquired a cavity from eating too many pastries, and the Tan Liang elder had been forced to go to quite some trouble to restore it for him. Since then, Chuaning had refrained from overindulging for the sake of his thin face. That is again such a Chuaning thing, like, oh, I actually really like this one thing, but because of the inconvenience that this one thing has caused me, I shall refrain from it entirely. Oh goodness, I have the biggest headache, sorry. Being temporarily stuck as a kid had the unexpected benefit of letting him eat all the sweets he wanted. Moran watched him eat with his cheek in his hand. Your taste is just like Shizun's. I'm living for these subtle moments where it shows how much Moran actually knows about Chuaning, and I don't think Moran even really realizes it. Chuaning choked a little, but managed to maintain his placid expression. After a moment, he said, "Is Shizun talking about the Yuheng elder?" "Yep." Moran nodded with a smile as he pushed a steamer basket towards Chuaning. "Try this, I think you'll like it too." Chuaning picked a leaf-wrapped bun from the bamboo steamer and took a small bite. Warm steam gushed from the bun, and inside the soft gelatinous wrapper was a sweet bean paste filling. Do you like it? Chuaning took another bite before nodding. Guys, I'm living for this. My heart, he's too precious. I love that Moran knows these things. Yes, it actually like builds out their relationship so nicely. Moran smiled, then have some more. As the three of them chatted while eating, Chuaning suddenly remembered an earlier subject. After finishing his fourth bun, he asked Shumeng with a faint nonchalance, "By the way, young master, you mentioned earlier that every elder has a nickname. If my Shizun, the Shunji elder, is called the Rubbish King, then what's the Hyung elder's nickname?" Oh no, guys, I don't know if we're ready for this. Because as we know by now, Chuaning has a very thin face. Chapter 54. This venerable one squabbles over pastries. Shizun? Shumeng's expression immediately became more respectful. Out of everybody on Sishin Peak, he's the only one who doesn't have any nicknames. No one dares to joke about him. That is a blatant lie, and we know it. Nonsense. That's only because everyone knows that you like Shizun, so they hold their tongues around you. Moran rolled his eyes and pulled Chuaning over as he stage whispered. I can just picture that. Oh my word. Okay, sorry. Don't listen to him. I'll tell you. Out of everyone on Sishin Peak, the Hyung Elder has more nicknames than anybody. Oh goodness. Oh? Really? Chuaning lifted his eyebrows slightly, intrigued. For example? For example, one of the more courteous ones would be Bai Wu Chang. Why do they call him that? Because day in and day out, he only ever wears white. I don't know how to feel about the fact that that is considered to be the more polite one. Because I suppose it's technically harmless. What else is there? Little Napa cabbage. Why? Because day in and day out, he only ever wears white. What else? Big Mantur. Is it gonna be just, again, because he only ever wears white? Why? Because day in and day out, he only ever wears white. What else is there? Little Widow. Chuan stared in incredulity. Do you know why they call him that? Moran asked, perfectly oblivious to the flicker of murderous intent in Chuaning's eyes. He only continued to laugh stupidly. Because day in and day out, he only ever wears white. If it weren't for his self-control, Chuaning probably wouldn't have been able to maintain his composure. Well, what else is there? Ayo. Moran glanced at Shumeng's expression and said in a low voice, If I say any more, I'm afraid my cousin here might pour the entire hot pot over my head. Wise choice. I think your death is already imminent, but still, wise choice. Shumeng slapped the table, gnashing his teeth. That's ridiculous. Who allowed them to make fun of Shizun like that? What do you mean, little Napa cabbage and big Mantur? Not to mention little widow. Are they sick of being alive? Ah, Moran replied, barely able to contain his laughter. Mad already? You haven't even heard what the female disciples call him yet. It'll give you goosebumps. Shumeng's eyes widened. What did they call him? I also want to know now. Let me just see. That honestly wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Yes, same. I'm glad you didn't mention the devil part. Yes, because, like, for me, I was scared it was going to be, like, stone face Wanning, or, something that would poke at the fact that he tends to hide his emotions and appears very cold. Well, what else? Moran drawled lazily. They're girls, after all. Everything out of their mouths is flowery. It's all pear blossom bathed in pale moonlight this, and untrodden snow of early spring that, or else it's Sir Chu of Lin An, purest of all lotus blossoms, and stuff liking him to the legendary beauty Shi Shi. My goodness. Chuaning had no words. I'm kind of living for that. But also, can we just appreciate that Moran, who has very little memory for anything ever, perfectly remembers all the compliments the girls pay to Chuaning? Shumeng had even fewer. Those nicknames are still fine. In comparison, looking at look at Tan Lian Alder. He gets way worse, what with his terrible temper and mediocre looks. Out of all 20 elders on Shizun Peak, the Tan Lian elder was the one with whom Chuaning had the worst relationship. So he asked, what do they call him? Something like wintertime pickles or mustard greens because his skin is dark. I didn't like that. Moran laughed. Meng Meng, don't make that face at me. You have your fair share of nicknames too. Shumeng looked like he'd just swallowed a whole egg. What? Me too? Of course, Moran said, grinning. Shumeng cleared his throat, feigning a casual attitude. Well, what do they call me? Fanny. What? Why? What do you mean, why? Isn't it obvious? Moran couldn't even make it 3 words in before his shoulders started shaking with laughter, until he eventually burst out cackling, slapping the table. You're like a peacock fanning its tail feathers everywhere. Shumeng bounded to his feet, howling in anger. Moran, I'm gonna kill you. This did not go well. By the time the 3 of them had eaten and drunk their fill and made their way back to Shizun Peak, it was past midnight. Chuaning allowed himself to be escorted by these 2 dumb disciples to the quarters of the Shunji elder, where they parted ways. Before leaving, Shumeng asked if they could meet again tomorrow at the bamboo forest, but Chuaning, not knowing when he might return to his original form, thought it best not to commit, and only said that he'd come by if he had free time. Chuaning waited until the 2 disciples had gone far enough away, and only then did he use his qinggong to fly up lightly, stepping along the edges of the roof tiles to make his way back towards the Red Lotus Pavilion. Early the next morning, Chuaning woke to find himself still stuck in the child's body, and couldn't help but feel slightly dispirited. Pulling a face, he stepped onto a wooden stool and glared at the person in the mirror for a long while, unable to bring himself to do so much as properly comb his hair. After some consideration, he concluded that this really couldn't go on any longer, and so he set off to go find Xu Shengyong. What? You saw Mengar and Renar yesterday? Yes, I said I was the Shinji elder's disciple, and they didn't seem to doubt it, Chuaning said. If Shimeng comes asking you about me, remember to cover for me. More importantly, I've been cultivating for more than 10 days and nothing has really changed. This isn't working. I'll have to ask Tan Liang Elder to take a look after all. Oh ho! What happened to our Yu Heng and his thin face? Being too embarrassed to ask for help? Chuaning shot him a cold glance. However, when such a look came from a young child, it wasn't the least bit imposing. Rather, it looked like the child was pinching a fit. Chuaning was quite adorable as a kid, and Xu Zhengyong couldn't resist reaching out to pat his head. Sect leader, Chuaning said suddenly. When my body returns to normal, could you ask Silk Rental to tailor a new set of Sishan Peak robes for me? Not white. Oh, no, but I like his white outfits. They're so pretty. No. Okay. This one seems less clever. I love the man. There's no one better than Chuaning's best friend. Yeah, no, I agree. Like, he is a very good counterbalance to Chuaning, and it's such an unlikely friendship as well. You wouldn't expect the two of them to get along as well as they do. But it also like shows you that if the differences between himself and Moran were resolved, then they would get along very well, because I do believe that Xu Jingyong and Moran have quite a lot in common in terms of personality. Okay. Hmm. Xu Jingyong was entirely taken by surprise. I thought you didn't like wearing light armor. Just changing my wardrobe up a little, Xuanning said with a dark expression as he walked away. Although the Tangliang elder wasn't on good terms with Xuanning, he had to hold himself back a little bit in the presence of their sect leader. However, though his words remained civil, his derision was evident from his gaze. Xuanning raised his eyes, expressionlessly watching the Tangliang elder. Tanliang's eyes were shining with glee, almost like fireworks were going off within them. Chuaning continued to stare expressionlessly. The Tanling elder let go of Chuaning's wrist after taking his pulse. Madame Wang's diagnosis was more or less correct. Chuaning yanked his hand back and tugged his sleeve down. Then why has there been no change even after 10 days? You might not have absorbed much of the sap from the ancient willow, but it was potent. I'm afraid that it might be quite a long time before you return to your original form. How long will it take? Chuaning asked casually. Not sure, but probably about 10 years. What? Oh goodness. Chuaning's not very happy about this. Chuaning's eyes instantly widened. The Tang elder tried his best to keep a straight face, but his own eyes were brimming with glee at Chuaning's misfortune. Yes, it's probably gonna take another 10 years before you reclaim your original form. So is he gonna like end up growing up alongside Moran? But that wouldn't make sense though, because they can't like have their Shizun missing for 10 years. Oh no, this is an entire disaster that I was not prepared for at all. Okay. Oh, we haven't had one of these in quite a long time. Some beautiful artwork. There you go. I hope you guys can see it properly, but it is gorgeous. It's so cute. He looks adorable. And it's so funny to see him look so unimpressed in like a child form. Chuaning stared at him for a while, then said darkly, "Are you kidding me?" Perish the thought! You are the Yiheng elder after all. Tangling smiled. Anyway, if you asked me, there's nothing wrong with you. This is good even. Your body may be smaller, and your mental age slightly more immature. And only slightly, mind you. But your cultivation is intact. Oh, what, this man is patronizing. Okay. Why the rush to return to normal? Chuaning's ashen-faced, was left unable to reply. However, there is no guarantee that you'll stay in this child's form for the entirety of these 10 years. This variety of tree sap migrates along the same paths as your spiritual energy. If you were to refrain from using any spiritual techniques for 3 to 5 months, you would likely be able to recover your original form. That works too! Xu Zhengyong's eyes lit up with hope, but Tan Liang continued with a faint smile. Hold up, sect leader. I'm not done explaining yet. Even if the Yuheng elder returns to his adult form, thusly, he would be unable to use too many techniques, because once his spiritual energy was depleted from overuse, the willow sap would again exert its influence, and he would return back into a child. Overuse? How much would count as too much? Xu Zhengyong exclaimed. About that. Since the sap has already spread throughout his entire body, at most he'd only be able to use 2 techniques per day. Chuaning spoke in a voice that was as cold and hard as steel. The barrier to the ghost realm constantly develops breaches in need of repair, and forging automatons also require spiritual energy. If I could only use 2 techniques a day, I'd be as good as useless. Well, that's all I've got. Tang Liang's voice dripped with sarcasm. Ugh, getting on my nerves. I know this is technically how Wen Qing is too, but this man rubs me the wrong way. No, but there's levels. There's levels to it, and the thing is, as much as when Qing is biting, she was never ill-intentioned in my mind, whereas this guy is just coming off like needlessly annoying, to be frank. We are on chapter, sorry, give me a second. Chapter 54, page 101. Are we? Oh no, sorry, page 100. After all, if the mortal realm were to lose the Baidu immortal, the sun might fail to rise on the morrow. On the side, Xu Zhengyong fretted. Tang Liang, quit the sneering already. Your medical techniques are among the foremost in the cultivation world. Please think of something. Even if Yu Heng's cultivation hasn't been affected, he's still in a child's body, so his abilities simply aren't what they were. Not to mention, if the other sects hear that Yu Heng was injured at Jincheng Lake, they might think to try something funny. 10 years is way too long. Could you look for some medicines or something that could maybe... The Tongling elder sneered and interrupted him mid-sentence. Sect leader, the sap that infected the Baidu immortal is from an ancient tree spirit, not some common poison. Do you really think that I could just come up with a cure on the spot? That's not what he's asking you, though. He's just asking you to try harder than you clearly are trying at the moment. Xu Zhengyong was stunned silent. That's enough for now. I have to go extract medicine for pearls, Tang Liang said languidly. Why don't you two see yourselves out? Tan Lang. Oh my, I've been saying his name wrong this entire time. Why am I only now realizing? Tan Lang, that is his name. It's not Tang Liang. I don't know where that came from. And I have a mosquito here keeping me company. That's always great. Xu Zhengyong wanted to say more, but Chu Aning tugged on the hem of his robes. Sect leader, let's go. When they reached the door, Tan Lang's voice suddenly carried to them from behind. Chu Aning, if you're willing to beg me properly and humbly, then who knows? I might be willing to help derive a cure. Although I've never seen someone with your condition, I might not necessarily be unable to assist, so why don't you think about it carefully? After a long moment, Chuaning looked backwards. What would count as properly and humbly? Tan Lang reclined on the couch, lazily sorting out the bundles of silver needles on the table. He raised his eyes to the sound of Chuaning's voice, disdain appearing in his gaze. When other people are at the end of the rope, they get on their knees to prostrate themselves to beg for help. We're colleagues, so I won't ask you to get down and knock your head on the floor. But if you kneel and grovel a little, I'll consider it. See, this nonsense, Chuaning would not Chuaning, Wen Qing would never do. So, yeah, I don't like this man. Chuaning said nothing as he gazed indifferently at him. Only after a while did he say, "Winter-time pickles, you must be dreaming." With that, Chuaning flicked his sleeves and left. The Tanlang elder was left stunned, unable to figure out what winter-time pickles meant, even after half a day of pondering. Serves you right. Oh, okay, sorry, my throat is very dry. Let me just quickly grab a little bit of coffee. You still have mosquitoes? Yes. Every now and then we'll still have one or two popping up. Trending is the best. He indeed is. Okay, what is the time? Okay. Okay, let us continue. The days trickled by slowly. The Yuheng elder declared that he was going into seclusion to meditate, when he was actually trapped in the body of a child, unable to return to his original form. Xu Zhengyong, Madame Wang, and the Tanlang elder had found out about it one after another, and to prevent the secret's exposure, the Shenji elder was also informed. A few months passed in the blink of an eye. The Red Lotus Pavilion's doors had been closed to visitors for quite a while, and Shimeng and his fellow disciples worried despite themselves. Shizun has been in seclusion for more than 70 days now. Why hasn't he come out yet? Maybe he's refining his cultivation level. Shimei took a sip of spiritual mountain dew from his cup and looked up at the dark, overcast sky outside the window. Looks like it's going to snow. Soon it'll be New Year. I wonder if Shizun will come out before then. Moran was flipping lazily through the manual of sword techniques. Doubt it, he said in response to Shimei. Didn't he send us a message with his high-tongue flower a couple of days ago to say that it would be a while yet? I doubt he'll be out in time. Okay, but if he sends messages, isn't it obvious that it sounds like a child speaking? Like, how does that work? I'm not sure. Okay, but another thing that I was wondering now is if he keeps on having to stay away, it's gonna interfere with his ability to prepare them for the the competition that's gonna be happening in 3 years' time. So that might also be a big problem. Okay. It was a day of rest on Session Peak, when the disciples didn't need to practice cultivation. Moran, Shumeng, and Shimei had gathered to enjoy some freshly brewed tea and warmed wine. The bamboo curtains of the small pavilion in the yard were half drawn, the heavy screens concealing its occupants, and steam wafted lightly from beneath the fringe. There had been a new addition to their little group of late. The Shunji elder's disciple, Xiaoshini. ever since the day he met Shumeng, and Shumeng had dragged the kid along to cultivate or play every couple of days, and before long the group had become inseparable. Thus, the young elders' group of 3 disciples mysteriously became a group of 4. At this moment, Chuaning, as Shasani, was seated at the table eating pastries. He ate in a refined manner, but the speed at which he consumed them wasn't the least bit lacking. Shmeng glanced at him inadvertently and paused in surprise, doing a double take between the plate and Shasani. Wow, um, Shashidi, he said with amazement. Who'd you inherit the bottomless stomach from? Don't insult him like that. Let him enjoy his snacks, damn it. It's a spiritual message, so I think it reflects his actual voice. That would make sense. Chuaning was oh my word, that's funny. Chuaning was chewing. Chuaning was chewing leisurely on a piece of osmotos cake. The cake was delicious, and he didn't bother responding to Shumeng. After all, he was fighting with someone over. Uh, After all, he was fighting with someone over the food. Moran and Chuaning's hands landed on the last piece of crispy lotus pastry at the same time. Their eyes shot up, and it seemed as if lightning crackled between their gazes. Let go, said Chuaning. Nope, Moran replied. Hands off. You've already eaten 8 pieces. This one's mine. You can have any of the others, just not the lotus pastry. Moran glared at the little fellow for a while before pulling out his trump card. Shidi, if you eat too many sweets, you'll get cavities. That's fine. Chuaning was very calm. I'm 6, so it wouldn't be embarrassing. Moran was struck speechless. Yeah, that's not usually the reason why you worry about getting cavities, Chuaning. It's not because you'll get embarrassed. It's because of health concerns. There was a loud smack as Shumeng's strike landed alongside his scathing complaints. Moweya, how annoying can you get? Fighting with Shidi for food. How old are you? The moment Moran covered his head with an ayo, Chuaning snatched the lotus pastry, his hands quick and his face expressionless. He felt quite satisfied as he took a small bite. Shidi! Chuaning ignored him, totally devoted to nibbling on his sweets. The 4 disciples were busily making a ruckus when a sharp whistle pierced the skies and reverberated through Shizun Peak. Chuaning's expression grew solemn. The gathering whistle? Shmeng lifted the hanging curtains halfway up to look outside the window. The disciples who had been walking outside stopped in their tracks to look around with expressions of surprise. At the sound of the gathering whistle, everyone in Shizun Peak had to gather in the square before Lotus Hall. As one might guess, this meant that the whistle was only blown in times of emergency. Before Chuaning had joined the sect, this whistle had sounded often, whenever the ghost realm barrier was breached. However, since Chuaning's arrival, the whistle hadn't been heard in a long time. Shimei put down the book in his hand and got up to walk to Shu Meng's side. How strange. What could be so urgent? Is this like supposed to be a hint that Chuaning is starting to lose his spiritual power? Oh goodness, I hope not. Don't know. No point wondering. Let's go take a look first. Only Moran was silent. He pressed his lips together, and his lashes fluttered downward, covering the unnatural flickering. Sorry. He pressed his lips together, and his lashes fluttered downward, covering the unnatural flicker flashing through his eyes. He knew what this whistle foretold. However, the timing slightly different from his memory of the events. He hadn't thought that this would happen so soon. The 4 disciples assembled at Shizun Peak, where the rest of the disciples arrived one after another. Before long, the entirety of Loyalty Square was filled with the sect's elders and their disciples. Once everyone had gathered, Xu Zhengyong walked out from the tightly shut doors of Loyalty Hall to stand before the jade-banded platform. After flights, above flights of limestone steps, 6 beautiful women followed behind him, some looking charming while others seemed cold, but all were impossibly gorgeous. They stood against the wind, wearing only thin silk robes despite the bitterly frigid weather. At a glance, their red skirts were like unto the what? Were like unto the clouds at dawn, and their eyes seemed lit with scarlet flames amidst the delicate fluttering of silken ribbons. Finally, a red dot in the shape of a flame lay beneath each of their eyebrows. Shimeng was stunned, and it wasn't only him. The expressions of just about every person in the square changed once they laid eyes on these 6 women. Shimeng stared blankly for a long time before he managed to speak, his voice trembling. Envoys of the feathered tribe. Did they just come from Shuchu, the land of immortals? Ooh, okay. Oh goodness. Okay, I'm slightly concerned right now because obviously this is about to be a turning point considering Moran's thoughts up until now. Are they actually immortals though? That's an interesting thought. It's amazing how undeniably indispensable Chuaning is to the sect. He saved them so many casualties. Yeah, and then you have frickin' Tanlang Elder being all high and mighty about something and not thinking about everyone's safety. I too would fight my younger brother for the last dessert, never mind that he is half my height. It's a matter of pride. Well, we know between the two of them who is more prideful, so of course Chuaning will win. Okay. I just realized, like, when Chuaning sent the Haitang flower message to Xu Zhengyong, it wasn't a child's voice. I think he specified that it was a child's voice that said it to him. Or was it not? I will have to go back and check. I'm just wondering now, because that will definitely, like, clarify, I think. Or maybe potentially confuse me even more. Okay, chapter 55. This venerable one feels uneasy. Me too. Moran, me too. Shuchu might have been called the land of immortals, but its residents were not, in fact, immortal. Thank you for clarifying that. Rather, they were a people of mixed blood, half immortal and half fey. In the cultivation world, they were the beings that most resembled immortals and were known as the Feathered Tribe. The Feathered Tribe had always resided at Peach Blossom Springs, which lay beyond the maze of Mount Jihua. Yeah, Jihua. They rarely ever interfered in the affairs of the mortal realm. However, as half of the blood that flowed through their veins were still mortal, they weren't fully detached. Thus, they often appeared in times of turmoil or disaster in the cultivation world and used their immense power to help mortals through the crisis. Oh, okay, that's actually quite nice of them. When Moran had raised hell and turned the world upside down in his last life, the Feathered Tribe had appeared in droves. In the end, their power had been unable to overcome the Emperor, who had already perfected a forbidden technique. Moran had hunted down and killed every last one of them, treading across ground swathed with blood and scorched feathers. Shu, the land of immortals, had been burned to the ground in a single day. It was a hellishly frenzied memory. Whenever Moran recalled it, he broke out in cold sweat, thinking himself a man possessed and possessing endless cruel. What? Okay, sorry. Thinking himself a man possessed, endlessly cruel. Yeah, I have to say, like, these are moments where you really, like, are reminded of how terrible Moran was in his past life. Like, these moments and the moments where you see everything that he did to Chuaning. And I just really hope that he never returns to that in this lifetime, because then I will have a very hard time forgiving him. At present, he patently didn't have the strength to contend with the feathered tribe. In fact, due to the natural superiority of their blood, the vast majority of cultivators fell short of their power in terms of spiritual strength. Out of everyone on Certain Peak, only a few of the most exceptional elders could even exchange blows with one of them. Shmeng caught a glimpse of Moran's face and got quite a scare. "What's up with you? Why is your face so pale?" "It's nothing." Moran lowered his eyelashes as he whispered. "I just ran too fast earlier." In his prior lifetime, the arrival of the feathered tribe had marked the beginning of Shimei's tragedy. Moran's heart jumped to his throat. He thought it would be a while yet before all of this reoccurred. Why had the progression of so many events changed so drastically? The faint winter sun hung weakly in the sky, illuminating the world in a layer of deathly white. Standing underneath it, Moran found himself reaching out to take Shimei's hand. Shimei blinked. "What's wrong?" Moran shook his head and said nothing. At this time, Shizun began to speak. His words didn't much differ from those he had said in their last life. "I have called everyone here today because envoys of the feathered tribe have once again arrived. Just as they did 80 years ago, they have come to the mortal realm from Peach Blossom Springs to lend aid during foretold calamity." A pause as he looked slowly over the disciples gathered below. As everyone knows, the barriers to the ghost realm were originally erected by the god Fushi, but it has gradually weakened over these past million years and breaks every few decades. In recent years, its power has faded by the day, and despite everyone's greatest effort, Shmeng huffed under his breath. "That's talking some nonsense. It's obviously just the efforts of Shizun, more or less." Damn, him just delivering those, like, fatal truths. Every time Moran meets someone new. "You seem familiar. Have I slaughtered you before?" Yes, that is indeed it. Despite everyone's great efforts, the breach grows larger still, and the barrier will eventually fail, as it did decades ago. When that time comes, the boundary between the mortal and the ghost realms will be broken. Thousands of ghosts and spirits will flood forth, and the ordinary people will suffer. In order to avert this calamity, envoys of the feathered tribe have come to the sects to select those with the most suitable spiritual energy and innate skill to go to Peach Blossom Springs, where they will cultivate in seclusion. His words caused a commotion in the crowd. The feathered tribe was selecting people to go advance their cultivation at Peach Blossom Springs, in the land of the immortals. The gathered disciples went from awestruck to excited, and regardless of actual ability, each secretly nursed the hope and the expectations. Only Moran wasn't the least bit enthused. Instead, his features subtly portrayed anxiety. He was typically very good at feigning appearances, so much so that other people could never tell what of him was real and what was fake. but in the moment he couldn't remotely conceal his feelings. This had to do with Shimei's survival. In the past, Shimei had been selected by the feathered tribe and gone to Peach Blossom Springs to cultivate. Not long after his return, the barriers suffered a large-scale breakdown, and untold hordes of ghosts climbed up from hell. In the ensuing battle, Shimei fought alongside Chuaning, each taking one side of the array as they worked together to repair large breaches. However, Shimei wasn't as strong as Chuaning. Can we please, pretty please, have Moran being the one to go in Shimei's place this time? Because we know he's strong enough, I think. So I feel like it would be a perfect fix, and it makes sense for him as a character as well. And when the countless ghosts saw that the mortal realm was about to be closed off, they charged toward Shimei in a murderous torrent, as he was focused on maintaining the balance of the barrier. They ran him through in an instant. The demonic energy pierced through his heart and soul, and Chuaning didn't lift even a single finger to help, didn't even attempt to stop them. As Shimei fell from atop the coiled dragon's pillar, Chuaning instead chose to use all of his remaining power to seal off the rest of the barrier that Shimei had been unable to mend. It had been snowing that day. Shimei's falling form had seemed like just another one of those innumerable small insignificant flakes of snow. The snow fell non-stop, covering the sky. No one cared if a given frozen crystal flake was about to melt, just like how in generation after generation, when an ordinary person met their end after the decades of their lives from the birth to death, none but their close relatives cared. In that snow, in that pandemonium, Moran had held Shimei as his breath grew shallower and shallower, had knelt on the ground and begged Chuaning to please spare him a glance, to please save him. In the end, Chuaning only turned away, choosing to walk into the boundless white to realize his own prestige, thus severing the bonds between master and disciple. How laughable! The things Chuaning liked, the things he cared about, the things he pursued, all of it was so very laughable. For example, Chuaning liked the sound of rain in the lotus pond, and he liked the melancholy verses of the poet Du Fu, with his frighteningly strict adherence to form. Okay, before we go on and I get like thoroughly depressed, this is painful because obviously we don't know the context of Chuaning walking away, and I'm not saying that there is gonna be a justifiable reason for why he walked away, but I think there probably will be, knowing Chuaning's character as much as I do right now. And even just what we found out now of like, oh, he chose to close the barrier off, like that doesn't seem like abandonment at all. It seems like Chuaning not wanting Shimei's like suffering to be in vain. So just that part, I disagree with the way that Moran is framing it. It's obvious that Moran is framing it from a place of pain and betrayal, but from a more objective, and maybe not even objective. I don't think I can be objective when it comes to Chuaning, but from a side that is looking to give Chuaning the benefit of the doubt, I don't think that's the way he was intending his actions at all. I think he was just trying to do what was best for everyone at that point, because he knew he couldn't save, or he couldn't really do anything for his disciple, regardless of whether he let the ghost go now or went to try and help the disciple. So I hope that there's more to this, but I feel like there's already more to this than what Moran originally portrayed. Okay. For another, Chuaning cared about the sprouting of plants in the coming of spring and the death of cicadas with the arrival of autumn. He cared about where the flames of war were lit once again, and where the common people struggled. For yet another, Chuaning had always taught that it was righteous to put the people before the self. But Moran thought, to hell with the people. He did not know or care about those people. What did it matter to him whether they lived or died? If Chuaning's rain fell upon the mutterings of lost souls, if his plants were splashed with the tears of refugees, Moran didn't care. His rain was everyday rain, and his plants were ordinary plants. The common people were just a couple of words on the pieces of paper. Who the hell cared? And so he thought Chuaning was despicable, a hypocrite who spouted words of duty and compassion as if his heart was big enough to hold everything under the sky. In reality, that pathetically small heart of his hadn't even had a place for his own disciple. And there we see, in my opinion, Moran's blind spot. Because he just basically said, I have the exact opposite worldview to Chuaning, and that must mean that Chuaning's worldview is wrong. Afterwards, Moran had savagely asked Chuaning, does your heart ache? How could you live with yourself? You said it to put the people before yourself, and you're still alive while Shimei died following your commands. You're the one who got him killed, you hypocrite, you liar. Do you even have a heart? When Shimei fell from the platform, he was calling for you. He was calling Shizun. Did you hear him? Did you? Why didn't you save him? Why didn't you save him? Chuaning, you have a stone for a heart. You've never cared about us. You didn't care. You didn't care. And then everything had ended the way it did. Sorry. Okay. Chuaning was adored and respected by everyone in the cultivation world, practically a king in all but name, and no one spared a thought for those who had perished. Shimei's death was an unremarkable step under the feet of the victorious. Chuaning had traded an ungifted disciple for peace and prosperity, for so-called world peace. No one would say that he was wrong to do so. Only Moran saw that the brilliant crown atop his head was made of from the bones of the dead, that his success had been built on Shimei's death. Hatred welled from the bottom of his heart. Oh goodness, okay, give me a second. Because the thing is, I can blame Moran for all the actions that he took because of his hatred, but I can't blame Moran for feeling the way that he did, even though I know that Chuaning was well intentioned. Hey, young man, hey. All of a sudden, there was a warm hand on Moran's forehead. He stared and opened his eyes as he was ripped from his pitch-black memories. Before him was a delicate face, bright and lovely. One of the envoys of the feathered tribe had approached without him noticing, and she was smiling gently at him. Falling into a trance with such a great opportunity right in front of you? Ah, big sis, don't mind me. Moran did his best to cheer up so as not to rouse any suspicion, and he smiled back at the envoy. I've always been given to daydreams, and was so hoping to be selected that I got lost in imagining what Peach Blossom Springs might look like. So sorry about that. It turned out that, while Moran was lost in his memories, the envoys of the feathered tribe had descended and begun selecting people. He had been so caught up in his tangled thoughts that he had been wholly unaware of the things happening around him. The envoy smiled sweetly, then said something that Moran hadn't expected at all. Your spiritual energy is pure, and your cultivation and aptitude are both remarkable as well. If you wish to go to Peach Blossom Springs, then come along with me. Moran was stunned for a moment before it hit him. Go to Peach Blossom Springs? In his last lifetime, only Shimei and Chuaning had been chosen, so why in this life? He was too shocked to speak. Luckily, being chosen by the feathered tribe was something worthy of shock and amazement, so the people nearby didn't find the reaction remotely odd, and only gazed at him with envy. The envoy brought him to Loyalty Hall, and as the initial shock subsided, and Moran's heart stopped hammering in his chest, his eyes began to fill with an ecstasy that no one else detected. Things were indeed different in this lifetime. Even though he didn't yet know if these changes were for the better or for the worse, or why exactly fate had changed at all, at least he could go to Peach Blossom Springs as well. If he also studied under the feathered tribe, then when the time came, the heavy task of repairing the barrier might not fall on Shimei. Moran wasn't a cultured man. Even after living 2 lives, he still didn't understand what putting the people before the self really meant. What he did know was that Shimei was kinder to him than anyone else in the world, and that nothing mattered to him more, including Moran's own meat sack and half a wisp of returned soul. As long as Shimei lived, Moran would throw everything else away. When the envoy had finished their selection and gathered them all in front of Loyalty Hall, Moran found that the lineup completely differed from the one in his past life. And I am very concerned about that. Okay. It makes sense since Moran feels that he is the only one that felt Shimei's loss. The cultivation world wouldn't blink an eye at one more death, and Chuaning wouldn't openly mourn. I'm assuming that's what it says. I think my eyes just failed me for a moment there. Shimei was there as before, but as a result of being in seclusion, Chuaning had missed the selection, so he wasn't among the chosen. In his place was the Shunji elder's disciple, Shasini. Okay, great. So Chuaning still got the thing. That is good, because I was like, oh hell no! Please tell me it's not like one of the other elders just randomly, because that would be a mess. Okay, hold on. Let me just. Okay, I'm gonna read until 10:02, and then I'll take my break, and then we can do the last bit. Even more surprising was the fact that Shumeng had also been invited. Per the words of the envoy, the power of the exalted Guchen's sacred sword lingers on your person. How interesting. From the heaven-piercing tower nearby there came the deep sound of a clock reverberating throughout Shisheng Peak. From Shisheng Peak of the lower cultivation realm, the chosen are Shujiming, Moweyu, Shimingjing, and Xiasini, for a total of 4. The head of the envoys conveyed to Shu Jingyong before releasing a messenger minor bird. She lifted her hand with the vividly colored bird perched atop a fingertip, then continued in a clear voice, "These four are exceptional individuals, suitable in aptitude and sincere in character. Thus concludes this report." With that, she released the bird. The miner memorized her words, and with a flutter of its powerful wings, quickly vanished into the vast skies. To be able to go cultivate at Peach Blossom Springs was a rare opportunity, even more so than acquiring a holy weapon, and no one would turn it down. Moreover, they would be studying techniques to ward against breakdowns of the barrier to the ghost realm, the foremost duty and obligation of all those who cultivated. No one could decline. As for the time, it would take anywhere from a couple of months to 3 or 5 years. The feathered tribe was not unreasonable. Seeing as it was nearly the end of the year, they instructed the chosen to stay and spend the New Year's Eve at home. After that, they would return to bring the group to Peach Blossom Springs at Mount Juhua. When Moran thought about how he would soon be able to go with Shimei to Peach Blossom Springs, he couldn't be anything but overjoyed. However, it wasn't long before the joy faded. He didn't understand why at first, until one day he passed the foot of the southern peak of Shizun Peak and looked up to see the sealed-off Red Lotus Pavilion. Moran's steps slowed unconsciously, then came to a stop altogether. He stood there, gazing up where the mountain disappeared into the clouds. Chuaning had been in seclusion for over 3 months. In this life, the hatred Moran had towards the person seemed to be ebbing away, even if he reminded himself time and again to not forget the look on Chuaning's face when he'd abandoned Moran and Shimei. There were times when he empathized with his Shizun, when he felt confused and disconcerted. Shasini was walking with him. Upon seeing the odd expression on Moran's face and the way he stared at the southern peak, lost in thought, his heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "Shashiri, do you think he'll come out before we leave?" "He?" Ah, Moran paused, coming back to his senses, and smiled down at Chuaning. Having spent quite some time together, he felt that the little Shidi was clever and sensible, and he had grown very fond. "I was talking about my Shizun, the Yuheng elder." "I see." Moran sighed. "He's never been in seclusion for so long before," he muttered. Could it be that the injury he received in Jincheng Lake was actually super serious? This was the first time in a long while that Moran had brought up his Shizun of his own accord. Chuaning already knew that it was impossible, but he still couldn't stop himself from asking, "Do you miss him?" Oh no, I'm scared to read the answer to that. Okay, chapter 56. This venerable one is busy wrapping dumplings. That is such an unserious chapter title. Okay. Upon being asked the question, Moran's face was one of bewilderment. Do I miss him? In spite of the deep, unforgettable resentment Moran harbored from his previous life, the Chuaning of this life had yet to wrong him. In fact, Moran Shizun had shielded him from danger over and over, and he had furthermore been the one to get himself covered in injuries from head to toe, and bruised black and blue, also for Moran. After a long time, Moran finally responded, all those time that he's been injured, it was because of me." When Chuaning heard the sentiment, he felt a twinge of warmth in his heart. However, before he could say something to Moran in return, Moran continued, "He done too much for me, and I can only hope to help him recover a little bit faster. I don't want to owe him anything." So close and yet so far. The flicker of warmth in Chuaning's heart seemed to die. perfectly unmoving, frozen over. He stood still for a little while, feeling profoundly risible. I've never heard that word. Moran had already told him that their only tie was that of master and his disciple. It was nobody's fault but his own that the slightest scrap of hope had sent him dizzy with excitement, flying like a moth into a blazing fire. If he was scorched to ashes, that was entirely on him. Chuaning smiled. It was probably ugly, and it was probably an ugly, dejected smile. You're overthinking it. You are his disciple, so owing debts doesn't apply. Everything he does willingly. Moran's eyes turned to him. Oh, you're so young, but you always look so serious and talk like a grown-up. He laughed brightly and patted Chuaning's head. At first, having his head patted like that made Chuaning laugh along, but after a while his eyes slowly filled with tears and he looked up at the dazzlingly bright face in front of him. Moran, he said softly, I don't want to play with you anymore. Let go. Moran's skull was several inches too thick. He didn't notice the change in his Shadi's expression. Besides that, he had grown too used to horsing around and being rowdy with Sharsini that he didn't hesitate to pinch the child's soft, baby-smooth cheeks, squishing them and tugging his lips up into a funny smile. Sharsini, what's got you so mad? Chuaning stared at the child reflected in Moran's eyes. The smile into which that face had been pulled was terribly ugly, making it look like an absurd, pathetic monster. Let go. Moran obliviously continued to tease him as before. Okay, don't be mad. I won't say that you're pretending to be an adult, Come here, let's make up. Call me Sugar. Let go of me. Be good. Call me Sugar, and in a bit I'll buy you osmosis cake for a snack. Trunning closed his eyes, eyelashes trembling slightly, and finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Moran, I'm not kidding around. I really don't want to play with you anymore. Can you let go of me? Let go, okay? His slender eyebrows knit together, and his tears didn't trickle from his eyes only because they were tightly shut. However, his voice was choked with sobs. Moran, it hurts. This is painful. I don't like this. Go away. Ah. Like he's basically begging him, and Moran is just not getting it because he has no context for anything. I kind of want to cry. Okay. No, don't say that. That's the worst thing you could say, Moran. Tranning's mentality is also that of a child now, so this is basically a child realizing that he's unloved. A senior disciple saying it's no big deal. Yeah. Oh, this is painful. Okay, I'm gonna stop here, take my break, and then I will be back at 5 past to continue until 7:45 my time. Okay. So I will see you guys again in a little bit. Okay, we are back. Yeah, no, like Moran just sometimes he can be really infuriating. And just so clueless. And I think the clueless bit hurts more than the times when he's like actually just angry and acting out for some reason. Okay. If I crack, just forgive me, please. It hurt too much. Holding someone in his heart like this, hidden carefully in the very depth of his thoughts. It was fine if that person didn't like him, as long as he could think about that person quietly and protect them silently. It was fine if he couldn't have that person. All of that was fine. But that person's warmth and tenderness was bestowed upon others while the only thing offered to him were barbs and thorns. So although Chuaning held him in his heart, whenever that person moved, his heart would start to bleed. Day after day, new wounds appeared before the ones had a chance to heal. It was then that Chuaning knew that even if he wasn't vying to capture the person's affections, every single moment that he continued to hold him in his heart would hurt him to his core. He didn't know how much longer he'd be able to bear this pain, didn't know when it would break him completely. Moran finally noticed that something was off and frantically let go. He touched the boy's red-tinged cheeks. He had no idea what to do. It suddenly occurred to Chuaning that perhaps being in the body of a child wasn't such a bad thing. At least this way he could say it hurts without reservation, could show a little bit of vulnerability. At least this way he could get Moran to look at him with genuine concern. This hurts. Can I say it? This was something that he had never even dared to think before. In the blink of an eye. No, you can't just skip to in the blink of an eye. I want a follow up on like that Moran like comforting him or something. In the blink of an eye, it was New Year's Eve. This was the liveliest time of the year on Shizun Peak. The disciples were busy putting up red paper talismans and sweeping snowdrifts. The head chef at Mingpo Hall was busy from dawn till dusk, preparing delicacies for the end of the year feast. On top of that, the elders devised spells and charms in their areas of expertise to add to their festivities that would welcome the new year. For example, the Tanlang elder transformed a pool of fresh spring water into fragrant wine, and the Shinji elder released 3,000 firelight mice that he'd been raising, allowing them to scatter throughout the sect and to keep watch wherever they went, bringing everyone a touch of warmth and respite from the cold. Meanwhile, the Lucan elder enchanted the snowmen everyone had made to run around the peak and yell Happy New Year at everyone they ran into. That sounds so cool. No one expected the Yuhung elder to do anything. As a matter of fact, he was still in seclusion. He had been gone for a long time and hadn't once been seen in public. Shimeng stood by the window, his face tilted upwards, gazing at the petals of Haitang blossoms fluttering down from the skies. We'll be gone tomorrow, he said pensively. It seems we won't be able to see him before we leave after all. I wonder what Shizun is doing right now. He's definitely cultivating, Moran said around a mouthful of apple. Speaking of which, all the elders are supposed to put on a performance tonight. It sucks that Shizun isn't here. If he was, he'd have to perform too. I wonder what he could even do. Moran laughed. Maybe he'd put on a demonstration of how to get angry, huh? See, it's moments like this that just. Like, it makes it feel as if Moran doesn't really care for Shizun because he dismisses his lack of presence so easily. And I know that we just had him like basically confessing that he misses Chuaning in the previous scene, but I can't help but want to be greedy for more of those kinds of moments. I don't know. Shimon glared at him. How about a performance of whipping Muwayu to death? Yeah, no, honestly. It was the new year, so Moran didn't feel like getting worked up over Shumeng's harsh joke. Then he thought of something and asked, "Oh yeah, have you seen our little Shidi today?" "You mean Shasini?" Shumeng asked. "I haven't seen him, but in any case, he's the Shungji's elder's disciple. Shungji's already been gracious enough to let him hang out with us all the time. If he stuck with us during the New Year's festivities, Shizun might get upset." Moran laughed. "I guess." The rays of the setting sun turned the evening above the Red Lotus Pavilion. Chuaning carefully looked over the pole he had held in his hand. Xu Zhengyong was sitting across from him and pouring himself a cup of tea. Since Chuaning hadn't invited him to have some, he also. Oh, okay, sorry. Let me try that again. Xu Zhengyong was sitting across from him and pouring himself a cup of tea since Chuaning hadn't invited him to have some. He also ate a crispy pastry from the plate. Etiquette be damned. Chuaning glared at him, but Xu Zhengyong kept chewing obliviously. "Yu Heng, aren't you done looking at it yet? Tan Lang can be pretty harsh with his words, but his intentions aren't remotely bad. It's not like he'd truly harm you." I have yet to be convinced about that. Where am I? "What are you saying, sect leader?" Chuaning replied lightly. "I was just thinking that since Chanlang Elder went through the trouble to concoct a pill that will allow me to regain my adult form for a single day, why didn't he create a couple more of them? That way, I could just take one when the need arose." If only it were that easy," Xu Jingyong said. "The raw materials that go into making this medicine are rare beyond measure, and after creating 3 of them, Tanlang's already out of ingredients. It's not a long-term solution." "I see," Chuaning said, deep in thought. "So that's how it is. Please give him my thanks." This is kind of giving me like Swan Lake, Swan Princess vibes, where it's like, oh, this mysterious person who's only in his true form every now and then, and the rest of the time he's bonding with his love interest, but without the love interest knowing about it. I'm such a sucker for like tropes like that. Huh. Xu Jingyong waved his hand. "You two are actually pretty similar, you know. Curt with your words, but not bad at heart." Chuaning shot him a glare, but didn't say anything. He poured himself a cup of tea and swallowed the medicine that would allow him to assume his original form. Xu Jingyong was about to eat another pastry when Chuaning stopped his hand. "Huh?" the sect leader said unhappily. "Mine," said Chuaning. Xu Jingyong blinked, at a loss. I like that it seems as if him being in a child's form is allowing him to become more comfortable with stating his needs and being more open and vulnerable than he was before any of this took place. When night fell on Shizun Peak, the disciples filtered into Mengpo Hall, one after another. Each elder brought their disciples and sat down with them to knead dough and make dumplings. Both the snowmen and the firelight mice treaded through the throngs of people, passing them jars of salt, red pepper powder, saucers of chopped scallions, and other miscellaneous ingredients. Every table bustled with excitement and chattering laughter. The young elders' table was the only exception. The disciples were all there, but their master was absent. Shmeng looked around for a bit and sighed. I miss Shizun. Didn't Shizun send us a letter a few days ago, telling us to enjoy the festivities and to work hard on our cultivation at Peach Blossom Springs? Shimei replied warmly. He said that he'd come see us as soon as he comes out of seclusion. He did say that, but just when will that be? Shimeng sighed sorrowfully, his eyes wandering listlessly past the gates. Then he suddenly sat upright, eyes opening wide like a cat as he stared. His face paled, then colored, flashing and dizzying shade of red, and his eyes shone brightly. He was so excited that he couldn't even speak properly. That's, that's. Moran's first thought was that one of the rare spirit beasts that the Shunji elder raised had escaped to liven things up a bit, so he assumed Shumeng was surprised because he was inexperienced and thus overreacting. That's what, he laughed. Look at you. It's like you just saw an immortal or something. What's there to be so... Moran turned around, still grinning gleefully, and casually looked up, and couldn't finish the rest of his sentence. Standing in the snowy dusk outside the door was Chuaning, dressed in white robes with a vividly red cloak. He turned elegantly to the side to put away his umbrella and shake off the dusting of snow. Then his eyelashes flicked up to reveal a pair of bright, slender, phoenix eyes beneath them, and a mild glance swept over them. By the time Moran came back to his senses, the one glance had his heart beating faster and his palms covered in sweat. Even his breathing had involuntarily slowed. The chatter in Mingpo Hall gradually quieted. Usually, whenever Chuaning appeared in the hall, the disciples didn't dare cause a ruckus, even more so now that he suddenly appeared on New Year's Eve after having been in seclusion for such a long time. The snowflakes on Chuaning's face seemed to make it even fairer and more beautiful, just as they made his eyebrows seem darker and more defined. Moran stood up, murmuring, Shizun. Shimeng bounded up and sprinted towards Chuaning like an excited kitten, yelling Shizun as he threw himself into Chuaning's arms. Oh, I love that. It's the kind of affection that I believe Chuaning needs to see more of. There we go. What are words? Chuaning's clothes were thoroughly chilled from the bitter cold outside, but Shimeng wore an expression like he was holding peach blossoms from early spring or a coal fire from late summer, endlessly warm. He began to shout raucously, not stopping to take a breath. Shizun, you finally emerged. I thought that we wouldn't be able to see you before leaving, but you do love us after all. Shizun, Shizun. Shmei also came forward and bowed respectfully, his face beaming with delight. Welcome back from your seclusion, Shizun. Chuaning patted Shimeng's head and nodded in Shmei's direction. This master has arrived slightly late, but let's go greet the new year together. He sat down at the feast with Shimeng at his side and Moran across from him. With Chuaning's arrival, and after the initial hubbub and excitement died down, the three disciples fell into their usual habits, sitting upright and still like their Shizun. Their table was weirdly silent. Flour, ground meat, eggs, and many other types of ingredients lay on the table, along with a brand new chopped chopped copper coin. Moran was the one with the best cooking skills in the group, so everyone decided that he'd be the one to give the instructions. Well, I guess I'll take charge then, Moran said, laughing. Do you guys know how to roll dough? No one uttered a word. Okay, I'll roll out the wrappers then. Shimei, you make the best wontons and dumplings fillings. Isn't all that different. So why don't you make the fillings? Shimei hesitated for a moment before saying, Well, there is some difference, you know. I'm afraid that I might not be able to do it properly. It's fine as long as it's edible, don't worry too much, Chuaning replied lightly. Shimei smiled. Okay then. Shimei, you can pass the water or help roll up sleeves or something. Just don't get in the way. Shimei was speechless. As for Shizun, Moran grinned. Would Shizun like to sit by the side and have a nice cup of tea? I'll wrap the dumplings, Chuaning replied coldly. Ah? Moran exclaimed, startled. He wondered if he'd gone violently deaf in both ears. What did you say you want to do? I said, I'll wrap the dumplings. Moran couldn't respond. He began to think that he would much rather have gone violently deaf in both ears after all. Okay. I wonder if... I hope the audio is okay. I keep forgetting to check in after coming back from breaks. But I still can't help but think that Shimei isn't the one that makes the wontons and that it's Chuaning, even though logically I know that makes no sense. I don't know. Okay, let me just quickly check something and then grab a little bit of coffee. Okay. Chapter 57. This venerable one listens to you play the gurchin once again. Unexpectedly, although Chuaning's dumpling wrapping technique was clumsy, the final product wasn't bad. The dumplings made by his long fingers were adorably round as they were lined neatly on the table. All three disciples were dumbstruck. Shizun actually knows how to make dumplings? Am I dreaming right now? Of course their hushed mutterings didn't escape Chuaning's ears. He pressed his lips together, eyelashes fluttering imperceptibly, and even though he was expressionless as always, the tips of his ears turned a bit pink. Oh, that's so endearing. I can't deal. Okay. Shumeng couldn't resist asking, Shizun, is this your first time making dumplings? Then how are you making them look so nice? It's not so different from making automatons. You just fold a few creases, there's nothing to it. I love this man so much. It might be a little bit unhealthy. Moran watched Chuaning from across the wooden table, gradually becoming lost in thought. The one time he had ever seen Chuaning cook in his last life had been after Shimei's passing. That day, Chuaning had gone to the kitchens and slowly made the wontons that were Shimei's specialty. Before they could make it into the pot, they had been struck to the ground by Moran, who had lost his senses. The snowy wontons had rolled across the floor. Moran had no recollection whatsoever as to whether those wontons had been round or flat, well made or deformed. The only thing he remembered was the look on Chuaning's face, the way he had stared at Moran without a word, with bits of flour still on his face, looking strangely unfamiliar and somewhat incomprehensible, even a bit dumb. Can this frickin' novel just stop making me want to cry? I would really appreciate it. Moran had thought that his Shizun would be angry, but in the end, Chuaning said nothing. He bent over, and with his head lowered, quietly picked up the dirty wontons one by one, gathered them up, and tossed them in the trash. Just what had been going through Chuaning's mind at that time? Moran didn't know. He had never thought about it, never wanted to think about it, and truthfully hadn't dared to think about it. The dumplings were all wrapped, and the little snowman carried them away to the kitchen to be boiled. In accordance with the tradition, Chuaning inserted a copper coin into one of them. Whoever got it would have good luck. It wasn't long before the snowman brought back the cooked dumplings, complete with a spicy sour dipping sauce in the wooden tray. Shizun, please go ahead first, said Shumeng. Chuaning did not decline. He picked up a dumpling with his chopsticks and put it in his bowl. However, he didn't eat it, and instead picked up 3 more to give to Shumeng, Moran, and Chimay. Happy New Year, he said mildly. The disciples were taken aback for a moment before they broke into smiles. Happy New Year, Shizun. As it happened, on the very first dumpling, Moran bit into a copper coin with a crack. He was caught totally off guard and nearly broke a tooth. Chimay laughed at the grimace on his face. Aran, you will have good luck this year. Shumeng said only, Tsk, lucky bastard. Moran said, teary-eyed, well, I was like, what? How am I supposed to read this? Shizun, you're a little too good at picking dumplings. Okay. I'm struggling to read it like that, but okay. I got it on the first one. Chuaning said, speak properly. I bit my tongue. Chuaning had absolutely no reply to that. Moran rubbed his cheek and took a sip of the tea Chimay offered before the pain finally subsided a little and he immediately began joking around. Okay. Could it be that Shizun memorized which dumpling had the copper coin and deliberately gave it to me? You wish, Chuaning said coldly, then lowered his head and started eating. Moran wasn't sure if he was seeing things, but under the warm lights of the candles, Chuaning's face seemed a little red. So can we take that as a yes? Like, yes, he did indeed do exactly that? Or is it simply that the implication already has him flustered? After the dumplings, a sumptuous dinner prepared by the head of chef was brought out. Platefuls of meat and fish covered the entire table. Mengpo Hall grew even livelier. From the seats of honor, Xu Zhengyong and Madame Wang directed the little snowmen to deliver red packets to every group. A little snowman bumped insistently against Chuaning's knee, the stones that were its eyes rolling around as it stared at Chuaning. Stared at him. Chuaning blinked. Even I get one? He accepted the red packet and opened it to find several sheets of pricey gold leaf. A little lost for words, he looked up at Xu Zhengyong, only to see the carefree man grinning back at him before raising the cup of wine in his hand towards Chuaning in a toast. How silly! Then again, Xu Zhengyong was really, truly. Chuaning stared at him for a while, and despite himself, a faint smile curved the corner of his lips. He raised his own cup towards the sect leader in return, and downed it in one gulp. Chuaning divided the gold leaves among his disciples. 3 rounds of drinks later, accompanied by non-stop performances on the stage, the atmosphere at the table finally grew lively as well. This was mostly because the 3 brats had grown less afraid of him. As for Chuaning, he had always been able to hold his alcohol. That's the change. Usually, like his type of character, I've noticed in these, tends to not be very good at holding their liquor. Shizun,
Let me read your palm. Shimeng was the first to get tipsy. He grabbed Chuaning's hand and held it in front of his eyes to carefully examine. If not for the 3 cups of wine in his system, he never would have dared to be so bold. Your lifeline is so long, but disjointed, which means your health isn't too good. Shimeng mumbled. You'll get sick easily. Moran laughed. That's pretty accurate. Chuaning shot him a glare. A long and slender ring finger. Shizun has good fortune with money. 3 lines from a common point. The love line branches off at its tip to merge down into the wisdom line, which typically indicates a willingness to sacrifice for love. Damn, Shumeng is like right on the money with this. Shumeng stared at it blankly for a while before whipping his head up. Is that true? Face ashen, Chuaning hissed between gritted teeth. Shumeng, are you tired of being alive? But Shumeng, too drunk to detect mortal danger, grinned sincerely and kept right on looking. Ah, and the love line forms an island shape, he muttered, right beneath the ring finger. At that, Shizun, your taste in love is dreadful. Absolutely abysmal. This man is very much psychic, it seems. I just want to check what the time is. Okay. Chuaning had had enough. He ripped his hand away and brushed his sleeve down to leave. Moran was about to die of laughter, doubled over holding his stomach and cackling loudly, when he suddenly caught Chuaning's icy murderous gaze and forcibly swallowed his mirth. His ribs ached with the effort. What are you laughing about? Chuaning said fiercely. What's so funny? He was about to storm off in a fit of pique when Shumeng grabbed his sleeve. In the next instant, laughter disappeared from Moran's face as Shumeng pulled Chuaning down in a drunken daze and burrowed into his arms. His forehead pressed into the folds of his Shizun's robes, and his arms wrapped around Chuaning's waist as he nuzzled affectionately. Shizun, came the teenager's soft, velvety voice, complete with a tinge of acting cute. Don't go. Come, have another round. Hee hee. Chuaning looked like he was going to choke. Shuziming, what do you think you're doing? Let go. Right at that moment, the little snowman from the stage suddenly clacked over. It turned out that Tanlang's elder's sword dance performance was over, and it was now Chuaning's turn to put on a show. Unfortunately, this also meant that all eyes in the hall had turned collectively towards Chuaning, just in time to see drunken Shumeng clinging to the young elder's waist and burrowing into his arms like a spoiled child. I'm really hoping that that Moran is jealous as all hell right now, even if he can't admit it to himself. Oh, I didn't get that bit. Okay. The disciples were absolutely flabbergasted. One of them even held their chopsticks upside down. All eyes stared unblinkingly at their corner. Chuaning was trapped in utter silence. For a moment the scene was incandescently awkward. The young elder could neither stand nor sit, locked stiffly in place by the way Shumeng clung on him. A long while passed in silence before 2 dry, forced chuckles came from Moran's direction. Come on, Shumeng, stop acting so spoiled at your age. He reached out and tried to drag him off. Off you get, don't cling to Shizun like that. Shumeng wasn't acting like a brat on purpose. In fact, he still remembered this when the alcohol wore off. He would probably slap himself silly. At present, he was drunk beyond all reason, and Moran had to pry and pull for quite a while before he finally managed to rip his cousin off of Chuaning. Sit. What number is this? Brow knitted. Shumeng squinted at the single finger Moran held out. 3? Moran stared at him in incredulous silence. Shumeng laughed and couldn't resist teasing him. Who am I? Shimeng rolled his eyes impatiently. You're Shimei. Duh. Then who am I? Moran asked. Shimeng glared at him for a while. A dog. Moran was stunned for a long moment before he roared. Shimeng, I'm gonna make you eat your words. Suddenly, a Sushin Peak disciple from the adjacent table, who was either naturally courageous or whose inhibitions had also been taken by alcohol, pointed at Chuaning and gleefully asked in a high-pitched voice, Hey, young master, look over there. Who's that? I don't think this is gonna go well. Oh no. Okay, before we move on, let's just appreciate another beautiful artwork. We've gotten 2 in this live stream, which I feel is very lucky. But look at this cuteness. This is just everything. I love it. Looks like a rowdy group of teenagers and their father. Oh goodness, he looks so aghast. Okay. Let me just... Shimeng, an authentic lightweight, could no longer even sit up. He slumped over the table, propped his cheek in one hand, and squinted at Chuaning long and hard. Chuaning stared back in silence. Shimeng continued to squint. Chuaning continued to stare, and Shimeng continued to squint. The deadlock lasted for a long while, but just when everyone thought that Shimeng was about to pass out drunk, he suddenly grinned widely and tried to grab Chuaning's sleeve again. Immortal Gurgur. Oh no. Oh no, okay. The words were clear and unmistakable. Every last one of the disciples was left utterly unable to make a sound. Pfft. There was no way to tell who started laughing first, but everyone soon lost control and joined in. Even if Chuaning's face was dour and his fuse was short, they figured that if everyone got in on the joke, then it wasn't like he could pull out Tianwen and whip every single person in the room. He might just try. Never say never. And so the lively Minpo hall roared with laughter, everyone chiming in over meat and booze, adding to the chaos. Ha! Immortal Gurgur! The Yuheng elder is so pretty, he really does look like an immortal. He really does. To tell you the truth, I secretly wrote a line of poetry about him once. Yeah? How did it go? The snow upon 1,000 untrod mortal peaks would pale against an inch of white upon the immortal's robes. Wow! When did you think of that? Not gonna lie, it was during one of his lectures on barriers. Oh my word, are we just now finding out that everyone is secretly thirsty for the Yuheng elder? It seems like it. That's some guts you've got there, my brave fellow. You better make sure the Yuheng elder never finds out that you were staring at him and getting all poetically inspired during his barrier lecture, or else the immortal's gonna commit murder, and your line's gonna have to become, the leaves upon 1,000 autumn trees would pale against the smear of red upon the immortal's robes. Oh my word. It's so poetic and so ridiculous, I love it. So cruel. Huh? Just telling it like it is. Chuaning's face spun through the roulette of colors before he finally decided to fake composure and pretend to have heard nothing at all. He was used to being reserved from a distance, but the sudden intimacy born from festive atmosphere and the abundance of wine left him unsure how to respond. Faced with such a situation, he genuinely didn't know how to react and could only force himself to fake a calm that he didn't feel. Yet the bloom of pink on his ears betrayed the frozen expression on his handsome face. Moran noticed. He pressed his lips together and said nothing, but for some reason an explosion of irritating jealousy surged through his chest, and I'm so happy to hear that. Sorry. Yes. Okay. It wasn't that he couldn't acknowledge Chuaning's good looks. It was only that, like everyone else, he knew well that Chuaning's beauty was the sharp sort, like the edge of a blade, and that when he wasn't smiling he was cold as snow and frost, too forbidding to approach. From his dim and narrow perspective, Chuaning was like a plate of savory and aromatic crispy meat that had been placed into a filthy, broken box. Moran was the only person in the entire world who had opened the box and been able to taste the deliciousness. That sounds so strange, okay. He never had to worry about someone else finding out about the delicacies and drooling over it. But tonight, bathed in the warmth of the stove fire and tipsy from the warmed wine, so many pairs of eyes were turned towards that box that had once been of no interest to anyone. Moran suddenly felt nervous. He wanted to cover the box and chase away the people salivating over his food like he'd swat away annoying flies. Then he remembered that, in this life, the crispy meat didn't belong to him. His hands were full of clear, translucent wontons. He had no time to chase away the wolves drooling over another meat. To the surprise of Moran and his fellows, Chuaning had come prepared with a New Year's Eve performance like the other elders. He would play the gochin. The disciples were starry-eyed, and someone whispered, "Who would have thought that the Yuheng elder knew how to play the gochin? He's so good at it too. I nearly forgot to try the meat." Moran sat there quietly, without a word. Shemang had fallen asleep a while ago, his breaths deep, and even from where he was sprawled on the table, Moran took the jar of wine by his hand and filled his own cup, drinking from it as he listened while staring at the person on stage, lost in thought. The irritation in his chest grew worse. In his last life, Chuaning hadn't played anything at the New Year's Eve fest. Even every few people, very few people knew how he looked when playing the gurchin. There had been a gurchin made of polonai, polonia, polonia wood, in the courtyard where Moran had kept Chuaning prisoner. One day, maybe to vent his frustration, Chuaning had sat before it, closed his eyes, and played a song. The sound of the gurchin had drifted through the air, attracting the birds and butterflies alike. When Moran had returned, the sight that greeted him had been that of Chuaning's profile in the courtyard, inscrutably lofty and serene. And just how had he treated him at that moment? Oh, right. Moran had pushed him down and slept with him next to the kitchen, violated the man who was as clear and cold as the light of the moon, right there in the courtyard. Moran had cared only about chasing his own pleasure. He hadn't spared a single thought for Chuaning's pain and discomfort. He had only disregarded the fact that it was winter, and his Shizun, who couldn't handle the chill, had laid there on the ice-cold cobblestone with his robes torn off and been slept with until he couldn't take it anymore and passed out. Oh, that is hard to read. Afterwards, he had not fully recovered, even after months of careful tending. At the time, Moran had said in a chilly tone, "Chuaning, from now on, you're forbidden from playing the gurchin in front of others. Do you have any idea? The way you look when playing is so—" He pressed his lips together, but he'd been unable to find the right words, so he hadn't finished the sentence. It's so what? It was self-evidently a serene, dignified look, but for some reason it was so alluring that it had destroyed every bit of Moran's self-control. Chuaning had said nothing, his lips pale and eyes closed, the set of his eyebrows stern. Moran raised a hand and hesitated for a second before touching the tightly netted space between Chuaning's brow. Taishinjun's gestures were almost gentle, but his voice was harsh and ruthless. If you won't listen, this venerable one will chain you to the bed, and then you won't be able to do anything but sleep with him. Don't think this venerable one won't do it. And just how Chuaning responded, Moran took another sip, watching the person on stage and continuing his melancholic recollection. He couldn't be sure, because Chuaning had said nothing. Or maybe he had opened his eyes and icily said, "Get the hell out." He couldn't remember anymore, not clearly. In that life, Moran had been entangled with Chuaning for so long that many things had become blurred at the edges. Eventually, like a beast, he had known only one thing, that Chuaning was his. Even if he didn't care for Chuaning, he was still his to sunder and to ruin. He'd have preferred to rip Chuaning apart with his own hands, bite through his ribcage and tear out his organs like a beast, than allow someone else to touch him. Ugh. Ugh. Moran wanted Chuaning's blood to course with his desire, his bones to bear his curse, and his body to be filled with his passion. Hadn't Chuaning always been so virtuous and untouchable? And in the end, hadn't he still had to spread his legs for the world's most wicked villain, on the bed of the most ruthless tyrant, and had his life taken away by the man's fiery weapon? Moran had defiled him, made him filthy inside and out, all over. Clothes once shredded weren't so easy to put back on. Moran closed his eyes, knuckles white, heart hammering. Sunken deep into his memories, he could no longer hear the lively merriment of New Year's Eve festivities, nor the soothing sounds of Chuaning's gudchen. All that remained in his mind was a callous, crazed voice, swooping back from the past and hovering like a vulture. Oh, okay, that is where we're gonna be stopping. Because, wait, let me just check something. Okay, let me read one more page and then we shall stop, because this is like the last page of the chapter. But this is very hard to read. Hell is too cold, Chuaning. I'll take you to the grave with me. That's right, you're a god. You're everyone's light. All of them. Shimeng, Meihan Xue, and all the common people are just waiting for you to shine on them. Chu Zongshi, how very saintly of you. The voice laughed, sweetly, laughed and laughed, until it suddenly became cruel, like a soul split in half. But what about me? It thundered. Have you ever shone on me? Ever given me warmth? All you've ever given me were scars on my body. How very saintly of you, Chuaning. Your body is mine, and your life too. You want to be their fire, but I'll take you to the grave with me. I'll make you shine on my dead body, and nothing else. I want you to rot with me. To live or to die, neither is your choice to make. Loud cheering and applause. Moran's eyes flew open. His back was drenched in cold sweat. The performance had ended, and the disciples were clapping enthusiastically. Sitting in the crowd, Moran felt his vision pulse and blur, fading in and out. He watched Chuaning walking slowly down the wooden steps, holding a gudchen made of... I just said the word and now I can't think of it. Paulownia wood. In that moment, for the very first time in this life, Moran suddenly felt that it was all so absurd, that his past self must have been mad. Chuaning wasn't actually a bad guy. Why was he even doing any of this? Moran swallowed, feeling the burn of alcohol down his throat, but he felt at no less of a loss, exhausted and confused, until finally he fell into a drunken oblivion.
Is he actually starting to see the light? I guess we will have to wait to find out. But that was heavy. It's such a weird, like, contradiction because you shouldn't want Moran to go anywhere near Chuaning. But because I kind of want Chuaning to have love and have a better life in this lifetime, it's weird that it feels as if the only person who can get, like, bring the level of love that Chuaning deserves is the very person who brought him so much hurt in the previous lifetime. It's so complex, and I can understand why some people might be put off by the horror that Moran inflicted on Chuaning in his past lifetime, and I find it so strange that I'm not feeling that way, and I can't quite describe why. Oh goodness, that was very good. I really enjoyed this, today's chapters that we managed to cover, because there was a wide range of emotions that I felt throughout this, but it is very heavy. Like, you can't deny that, even though Meat Bun does a very good job of kind of like interspersing the heavy chapters with some things that are a bit lighter. It is quite heavy, but I'm hoping that after this, like, New Year's Eve's party, there will be maybe like a little bit of a shift in Moran, and maybe like him and Chuaning as Shasani, like, growing closer together in a way that, like, nothing romantic, obviously, like 5-year-old, but like in terms of him maybe for some reason opening up to Shasani in a way that tells Chuaning what's going on in Moran's head, like how he's actually feeling, instead of like instead of there always being this misunderstanding about how Moran is actually feeling towards Chuaning. I don't know, but there's so many things that's going on in the background of my mind that I'm also like worried about, like with regards to the actual plot, not the romantic plot, but the like plot of, oh, everything is going at a different speed than it's supposed to be going. There's still like question marks when it comes to things regarding Shimei, and there's just a lot going on, and I can't like figure out what any of it is. Like, I have no frame of reference of where the story could potentially go next, which is very unnerving. So anyway, I need to go and give my voice a little bit of a rest. I've been talking for a very long time because I had something that I was filming before the live, and it took quite a while, so my voice is a bit tired. But I hope you guys still enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining me, and otherwise, I'll see you guys again next time. 再见。